The Ashen Verdict, a combined force of the best surviving Ebon Blade, Argent Crusade, and adventurers charged Icecrown Citadel, while the Horde and Alliance fought one another in the skies above. Jaina Proudmoore personally led a strike team through the Forge of Souls, where massive soul grinders pursued their namesake to craft and power Scourge weapons and machines. Watched over by Bronjam, who learned of soul alteration magic from Kel'Thuzad himself, and the Devourer of Souls, an amalgam monstrosity which serves as a watchdog for any stray souls. With the forge temporarily shut down, they were able to infiltrate further into the Pit of Saron, the Scourge's primary quarry for procuring additional Serenite. Captured soldiers sent here were worked to death, whereupon they would get up again and return to work. The initial assault did not go well, as only a very small number of the Ashen Verdict elite survived even the opening onslaught. Proudmoore and Adventurer both tried to free as many of the nearby workers as they could, arming them as they led a slave rebellion against Forge Master Garfrost, a particularly skilled artisan of Serenite, chief in sculpting it into armor, weapons, and architecture. Past him is Ik, the minute necromancer who functions as the labor force's overseer. Proudmoore was informed of a potential weakness in the nearby Halls of Reflection just before Ik was slain by the Death Knight Tyrannus, who earned his rank and mount for the slaying of Garfrost. Tyrannus put an end to the impromptu worker rebellion by murdering Horde and Alliance alike, with only a few scarce survivors to slay Tyrannus. With him removed, the path was clear to the Halls of Reflection, though by this point only a handful of adventurers remained alongside Miss Proudmoore. The halls were a place of quiet repose for the Second Lich King, where Frostmourne itself resided. Herein, Jaina was able to commune with half the spirit of the long-deceased Uther the Lightbringer. Uther, from his cold prison within Frostmourne, had learned much and quickly imparted all he could to the troop. The Helm of Domination served as a limiter on the Scourge, preventing the scores of undead from running rampant across the planet. And Arthas was still in there, somewhere, deep and distant. Uther was interrupted by the arrival of the Second Lich King, who, once again, chose not to personally combat the group, but instead loosed his most loyal knights upon them, Falric and Marwyn. These were the very first slain by Death Knight Arthas, and had journeyed with him and served him ever since he'd first taken up the Cursed Blade. Jaina, incensed, sought to combat the Second Lich King herself, but was simply no match. The best she could do was buy time as she and the remaining adventurers fled. Barely escaping with their lives, they took this information with them to the main assault group that had just established a makeshift outpost inside the Citadel itself. There were no Scourge more elite, skilled, or powerful than those within the Citadel. For his own reasons, the Second Lich King chose to position his best and finest here, in direct opposition to the adventurer elites. The most terrifying construct ever devised. The supreme leader of the Cult of the Damned, Dranosh Sarfe, brought back as a tremendously powerful Death Knight, much to Varrock's grief. The further up they went, the more the weight of Icecrown bore down upon them. To the west lay the Plagueworks, where two brand new types of abominations called Flesh Beasts defended Professor Putricide, genius scientist and chief developer of the Undead Plague and its distribution. To the north lay the Crimson Hall, where the three Sanlane thus far encountered were brought back to serve further contest. Past them was the Sanlane Queen, Lonathel, last of Kael'thas's doomed force that assaulted Icecrown during the Third War. And to the east resided the Frostwing Halls, where dragons were captured and transformed into the Frost Drakes the Scourge employed to great effect. As the adventurers ascended, their allies and supports slowly died around them. The cultivation the Scourge had been practicing all this time working on their enemies as well as their own. What remained was the single greatest fighting force the world had ever known, ready to bring down the Second Lich King and end his threat once and for all. Exactly according to plan. After allowing the adventurers to prove their might against him, he instantly slew the group and began weaving the complex magics necessary to rise them as his new champions. This was the Second Lich King's plan all along. Provoking the Horde and Alliance into the campaign into Northrend, falsifying the release of the Ebon Blade, allowing the Argent Crusade's push into Icecrown, and many other smaller incidents, all to weed out the weak from the strong, to bolster the best, the supreme, and then claim them for his own. Or so he thought. This too was actually part of a plan, or perhaps more accurately, a desperate gamble, by Arthas Menethil. Trapped, distant, and powerless within the Second Lich King, Arthas was able only to influence in the barest and faintest of ways. But it was his hope that by ensuring this fighting force stood here, that it would be able to topple the Second Lich King and, at last, save his people. This stratagem almost didn't work. Tyrion was able to release himself from his bonds and, at cost, destroy the Mournblade Frostmourne. This freed thousands of souls at once, immobilizing the Second Lich King. Thus he stood, the lion before the lambs, and they did not fear. They could not fear. With the blade destroyed and the helm lost, Arthas was allowed one last, brief moment as himself, before the other half of Uther took him and cast him into the maw. The Second Lich King was gone. Arthas was worse than dead, and now the Scourge would rampage unchecked across Azeroth. Tyrion, who has been getting slowly worse throughout this entire campaign, thought to claim the helm for himself, an act that likely would have doomed Azeroth for good. Instead, thankfully, there was an alternative. Bolvar. Still alive, for certain definitions of the word, Bolvar Fordragon had been claimed and tormented by the Second Lich King after the Wrathgate in order to break him into a new champion. But Bolvar's will was iron, and in so doing he proved himself the better to imprison the helm. Thus was the Third Lich King born. Henceforth, the Scourge would never again threaten Azeroth on such a scale or severity, with Bolvar firmly keeping things in check and maintaining free will to those undead left, such as the Forsaken and the Ebon Blade. What was left descended into petty local threats, or simply returned to their lives, such as they were. The extended Horde and Alliance forces returned home with what troops they had to pursue their war. Sylvanas Windrunner attempted suicide, as planned, though she did not find the maw to her liking and instead formed a pact with a jailer whose chains would unravel for some time to come. Rumblings echoed in the deep.